Hello, this is Adam Huss. I'm coming to you from under the harvest moon in the former territory of the people who separated the Sokokoi of the Misakoi Abenaki, where I'm now working harvest with the crew at La Garagista in what many seem to think is one of the worst vintages in a very long time in terms of weather. You may have noticed that I didn't welcome you to the Organic Wine Podcast. That's because I'm changing the name. It's a simple change, but I think it better reflects what you can expect when you tune in. I'm just adding the word Beyond to the name so that it's now the Beyond Organic Wine Podcast. Welcome. Nothing else is changing. You can still go to organicwinepodcast.com and Instagram at Organic Wine Podcast, but you can also now go to beyondorganicwine.com. They both take you to the same place. There's some inside wine lingo to the name change. I've heard it used and used it myself when talking to customers and wine drinkers as a shorthand way of letting them know that the viticulture behind my wine or another wine is really thoughtful, ecological, biodynamic, regenerative, etc. We just say it's beyond organic as a way of evoking this because what is actually beyond the limits of just organic is immense. It can get pretty complicated pretty quickly, and the average wine drinker isn't interested in mycorrhizal fungi or rotational grazing, sadly. I love the word beyond. I love the scene in the movie Click, where Adam Sandler goes to the Bed Bath & Beyond store and discovers an entrance to the Beyond section, which is, of course, a magical and metaphysical realm that changes his life. With this name change, I'm hoping to do the same thing, go through that organic portal and continue this journey of discovery of the wild and mysterious realm that is beyond. I've become convinced that many of our biggest problems are systemic, culturally rooted, and we cannot talk about alternatives without questioning the frameworks we use to give meaning to our lives. How can we talk about rewilding wine, for example, while using a language structure that came from the Romans and their cultural descendants who conquered and destroyed every wild and indigenous culture they encountered? I think we may need to relearn wild language to rewild our ideas. Even the word wild can have problematic connotations and may not convey the kind of nature-integrated thinking that I'm trying to talk about. And beyond just introducing you to the new name, I wanted to use this intro to ask the big question lurking behind the Beyond Organic Wine Podcast. What actually is this vision of wine that I'm talking about? I mean, why the heck am I doing this? Why do I care about these things? Answering this question is part of why I came to Vermont. I've been working harvest for 3 weeks with the crew of La Garagista. Should you get a chance to come to Vermont, you could not be luckier than to meet this crew. Maybe coven is a better word, who make up the team here at La Garagista. Deirdre and Caleb, Camilla of La Montanuela, and Anna of Lilith Wines. I've had the honor to work alongside and learn from these lovely folks, both in the vineyard and winery, and I can't say enough here to do justice to the amazing work that they are doing. Their commitment to an ecological approach to growing grapes and making wine is beautiful, inspiring, and delicious. If you haven't listened to my previous interview with Deirdre Heekin, it's pretty special, so check it out. But also her wines and the wines of Lilith and La Montanuela are transformative. The wines are informed by deep passion and a seemingly preternatural ability to intuit what kinds of wines these unique grapes in these unique conditions want to become, all without any inputs other than cosmic energy and probably a little magic. So I feel extremely grateful and fortunate to be here despite this terrible vintage. And as heartbreaking as this vintage has been for the winemakers here, it has been an incredible learning opportunity. These vines have been put through a stress test like none other, and I've been amazed to see how well some of them have fared despite everything. Coming from a California context, it has blown me away to see what these vines have produced, how good some of the fruit looks, and how healthy some of the vines look. In the first 2 weeks of my stay here, it rained inches on multiple days. And we harvested on the days that it didn't rain. This has been the entire summer here with flooding and extremely wet conditions. The vineyards have been like swamps, and I've walked among vines growing in standing water in many spots. and it bears repeating that these vines were traumatized by an extremely warm April that caused a lot of shoot growth, followed by a freeze event in May that killed much of that new growth. Vinifera under these same conditions would not only not have fruit, it would literally be dead on the ground, decaying. While there have been decreases in productivity here and some significant loss for growers, I've personally picked thousands of pounds of fruit in multiple vineyards. Vineyard site and vine health play a big role, and it seems to be all about the basics: slope, drainage, soil health, aspect, airflow, and farming. But some vines have done well across multiple sites. The ones that have stood out to me, and this is just a short list, are Brianna, a white grape, Petit Pearl, a red, and the Frontenacs, Frontenac Noir, Gris, and Blanc. Some other surprises were Swenson White and Louise Swenson, both white grapes. All of these have produced only slightly less amounts with healthy canopies and a lot of really good-looking fruit, using only organic and biodynamic sprays. Can you imagine growing these vines in a Mediterranean context? They'd be like super vines, sent by their parents from the planet Krypton to live among fragile mortals. If you were in a drier climate than Vermont, pretty much any hybrid grape would do well for you. But I'll throw La Crescent out there as something that I think tastes amazing and makes amazing wine. As a comparison, for example, I sprayed my Syrah in Los Angeles more frequently, had nowhere near as much rain, moisture, and humidity as these grapes, and definitely no freezing temps after bud break, and I still lost my entire crop. The more I observe, the more I realize there is really no comparison. The question isn't why hybrids, but why the hell vinifera? I've loved every minute of my time here in Vermont, but I especially loved the discussions that we've had while bottling or picking grapes. While Deirdre and I bottled her 2023 Grace and Favor Pet Nat, listening to music and working quietly, I asked her, "Do you like the term natural wine?" She said she did, but acknowledged it had its limits. Then she asked me what I thought. I admitted it bothered me a bit, because I saw wine as a product of human culture, and that it couldn't exist, no matter how we made it, without many human cultural interventions. I assured her that I didn't mean to denigrate wine by saying this, but on the contrary, wanted to elevate it to a kind of art form. I just thought that the term natural was disingenuous. She agreed, but offered the insight that perhaps the French term vin nature, from which natural wine derives, might embody some subtle differences that don't convey when translated as natural wine. As I thought about this, I wondered if the French term might lean more towards a sense of nature culture, wine that grows from a culture centered around nature. The root of cult and culture is to cultivate, to grow, but also to worship. If we worship nature in the way we cultivate wine, perhaps that is the essence of natural wine. To worship is to show reverence and adoration, often to a deity, and to honor with rites. Isn't this the way to practice the best viticulture? Aren't the soil and the sun and the rain and the seasons the source of us, our creators, so to speak? Don't the fruits of our cultivation transmute into our bodies and the strength and awareness that gives us life? When we create and spray biodynamic prep or prepare and spread compost, aren't these rites that honor the land and the life force that brings forth our wine? I want to make wine within a nature culture, to make wine that shows reverence and adoration for the natural world. And these thoughts of nature culture brought me back to that question of, why am I doing this? When I started this podcast, organic was important to me and still is, because I didn't want to harm the earth in the pursuit of making wine, or anything else for that matter. Organic for me meant do no harm. It still does mean this for the most part, but it doesn't challenge the culture out of which my idea of wine grew. Organic leaves intact the entire colonial and industrial model of winemaking. It allows us to swap out the sprays while changing nothing of substance. The problem with organic, if I can sum it up, is that you can farm a vineyard or orchard organically, even though you cleared old growth forest in order to plant it there. And what is my problem with the colonial industrial culture that I live in? I mean, what is the problem with clear-cutting ancient forests to make way for our human needs and desires? I guess the answer for me is that I've come to believe ancient forests are one of our greatest needs, and that we should align our desires with a way of life that preserves and even increases our ability to have a way of life. I've come to see the natural world as a literal extension of myself and my well-being, and having seen this, I can't unsee the deep connections everywhere. This vision makes me want to know more, but it also exposes the shortcomings and unsustainability of our dominant culture. Everything in our lives comes from the earth. Our homes and everything in them, our cars, the roads we drive on, our clothes and shoes, our phones, our food, and our wine. We've created a system, though, in which the source materials for most of these things are never replenished. We take from somewhere, and we sell it somewhere else. We take until that somewhere has no more to give, and then we start to take from somewhere else. Even if we take in a nice way, which seldom happens, but even if we do take in a nice way, there's still the problem of finiteness. When we take without giving back, we create a vacuum in the land and an emptiness in ourselves. I think I understand what motivates the taking. I mean, of course, there are the bad things, like ignorance and greed and vanity. But even behind those, if we can be compassionate with ourselves for a moment, there are the very understandable needs and fears of being a human animal in a wild world. Behind the thirst for power, control, and profit is the need for safety and security and a desire for comfort and pleasure rather than pain and suffering. So strong is this motivation that we let other people and creatures experience insecurity, pain, and suffering as long as we don't have to see it, if that means that we and our children don't have to experience these things. But we are beginning to reach the end of taking. We are beginning to reach a point where this system of taking and not giving back has created a poisonous world, an unstable world, an insecure and unsafe world. The machine we built in our desperation for security is eroding the possibility of that security. We've realized we can't outrun death. While all of this might have been inevitable in the trajectory of human development, our future isn't inevitable. Throughout history, humans have joined together in communities to build large projects that were, by one understanding, completely impractical. Think of the Teatro Antico in Taormina, Sicily, or the Mayan pyramids, or Notre Dame, or Stonehenge, or Angkor Wat. Each of these places, whether they are monuments to God or gods, storytelling and entertainment, love or mystery, all tell a similar story. That story is that we humans are not bound by what is expedient, convenient, practical, frugal, comfortable, or even necessary. We can do things for their beauty. We can build monuments that can only be understood by the thrill they bring to the eye, the way they quicken our heartbeat. We can embark on difficult and dangerous journeys because we know that we must feed some part of ourselves that food cannot satisfy. We can invest our energy and resources into the aesthetic side of life, knowing that the return we get is a reason to live. A luxury is an unnecessary thing that we don't need. I don't think wine fits this definition. Wine at its best reminds us that life is about more than survival. Wine can be an unnecessary creation that we can't live without. When I think of wine this way, I feel a profound responsibility. I want to ask how to make wine be the greatest aesthetic expression it can be. As I've pursued this question via this podcast over the past 4 years, I've learned a lot about the harm we've done to the world, as well as the ways that we can repair that damage. To not share that feels irresponsible. I started these interviews because I wanted to learn more about wine, but I'm realizing the most important thing I've learned is how to listen better. I think listening is a key to a healthy community. I want to encourage a community of people who see that our community can't be limited to just humans. I want to ask how to build viticultures that are not based on extraction, but based on showing reverence and adoration for the natural world and all the lives with which we share it. Look, I know this is a small planet in a very large universe, and my life isn't even a blip in the immense scale of time. I can use this as an excuse to be cynical and not care about anything other than my own whims. Do I really think I can make the world a better place, and what would better even look like? And would it even matter if I did? I'll admit that these are powerful questions. Maybe nothing I do matters, but I personally prefer to live in a beautiful world, a just world, a world of health and wonder. And I know that maybe I can't change human nature or the world, but I can change myself and the world that I touch. I know that I can listen better and empathize better and farm better, and that will make my wine more delicious. And it may not matter in the grand scheme, but I'd like to drink more delicious wine while I'm visiting this magical wine forest. As grandiose as it may sound, the why that forms the basis of the Beyond Organic Wine podcast is that I want to learn how to build a Notre Dame or Teatro Antico of wine. I want to ask what our viticultures could be when built from a spirit of worship rather than fear of this wild world. I want to ask how to build a system and a community from the ground up whose priorities are the things that make life worth living, despite our fears and our inevitable passing. That's what's Beyond Organic Wine for me. And now, picture yourself in a vineyard that slopes west, looking across Lake Champlain as the sun sinks over the Adirondack Mountains. You're picking grapes with the crew of La Garagista. The pace of the work is relaxed, steady, timeless. We're not worried about this process of making wine, of helping nature to make wine, because we haven't been taught to fear. There isn't a right or a wrong way to do this, so we can't screw it up. We can only listen, observe, learn, and enjoy. We're recording.
Getting ready for his close-up.
Awesome. All right, we're picking Frontenac Gris in Vermont with
Camila Carrillo and Anna Travers
and several other people. You say your name. Caleb. Can you guys describe this vineyard as what it looks like?
Well, it is definitely in its wild and thriving phase with lots of under vine growth.
I mean, it's not even under vine, it's up through the vine.
It's through
growth.
the vine. It's actually, it's part of the vine.
Yeah.
Lots of daisy fleabane, really beautiful, small daisy-like flowers, some grass, purple vetch, or at least the skeleton remains of it. And we are in the Frontenac Gris, and this is a section, a couple rows that were not pruned, so there's a lot of fruit to pick through.
I was actually going to ask you if this was something that we pruned last year or not. And I was getting the feeling that we did not.
No, I mean, we did prune, I think, the first 3 or 4 rows.
Right, okay.
But yeah, due to timing, and also I think when we were in here, it was like that time in May where the frost hit, so...
Oh, and that's when we realized maybe it's better to leave some of it unpruned. While we were still afraid of, like, some lower...
Some of the loss.
Temperatures, coming through.
Yeah.
After that.
And this is double cordon.
Yes.
Otherwise, I mean, if it was like behind the not pruning, its basic structure is double cordon.
Yes, also known as forearm niffin.
Forearm niffin.
Named after the man himself, I guess.
Mr. Niffin.
Mr. Niffin. And we do this kind of pruning to renew the wood because a lot of the diseases that we deal with overwinter, so it's good to get as much as that old wood out of the vineyard.
But you didn't prune this.
No. We didn't prune these 3 or 4 rows, but we did the...
Oh, you're saying
yeah.
You're saying you do cane pruning instead of spur pruning.
Yes.
For that reason.
Yeah, and I mean at this point, this vineyard has been taken care of really well by Deirdre and Company for long enough that it's in really good shape that it can afford to be unpruned in certain sections if need be.
And when you say cared for, can you describe spray program?
Yeah, so we, and I learned this from Deirdre, so it's a biodynamic practice. So we do, like, the base of our sprays is stinging nettle tea, and we also add some horsetail in the beginning of the growing season when it's kind of humid and wet. And we add homeopathic doses. This is from Deirdre. Of sulfur and copper. And then we also, water. And once July hits, when Japanese beetles are here, we add a little bit of kaolin clay to the mix, which helps also keep things dry, which is good for what we just went through.
And helps everything stick to the leaves more too, right? That's part of it. So that everything, even if it does, like, really everything is really able to be absorbed.
Even if it gets rained on a little bit, like, it's got a little more adhesiveness.
Correct.
Yeah, well, and also the kaolin clay, what's great about it is after it rains, you can see it working its magic, because then, like, the leaves are already starting to dry off. So it keeps things,
right.
Yeah. And,
how often do you spray?
Well, we alternate between copper and sulfur, and it's usually anywhere from like once or to twice a week. It kind of depends on how much rain you get, because you do want to get in there with a spray right after it rains, if possible. This season was particular because there weren't many windows.
Oh, because Deirdre basically said 4 sprays that involved a dose of either copper or sulfur, so 8 total, once a week.
Yeah, I lose count.
Okay, got it.
I feel like, it's like every other week, right?
She said once a week.
Once a week, or the week.
We can ask her.
The treatments like alternate.
Yes.
So it's like
yes,
every other week
right.
The same one.
Yes,
And
but it's. I mean, honestly, that's less than I had to spray my vines in Los Angeles this year. If it was 8 sprays, which is what she told me. And I lost my whole crop.
Yeah.
So I sprayed.
How much did you have
far
to spray?
more. I think I sprayed like 14 times.
Oh wow.
Maybe it's longer growing season is part of it, but I mean, just the number of sprays was a lot relative to this. And yours, there's tons of fruit here.
Yeah.
And I should say, even though it looks like the canopy everywhere has issues, the fruit everywhere, there is fruit everywhere.
Yeah.
Like every vine, every variety has fruit.
Tasting great.
Tasting great. Can you describe this vintage?
Ooh, the motto for this vintage has been, we'll see how it goes. It's been marked with a lot of unpredictability and a lot of firsts. So it's been interesting. But I mean, I think this vintage is a true testament of what good farming can do, 1, and then 2, also what hybrid grapes are really capable of doing, even amidst the some of the craziest weather that we have seen here in Vermont.
Yeah, I mean, I know that it's a little too judgmental to say it's the worst vintage you've had, because that could imply like that the wine will be bad, but as far as weather goes, it's the worst vintage you've had.
Probably one of the worst growing.
Yeah, it's been rough. I mean, I've being able to work in these vineyards and the Garagista's vines, I definitely feel a lot of hope for the work that they've done and how resilient these vines are. Because my little vineyard suffered greatly, and I definitely felt very pessimistic at the beginning of the season. But yeah, being here now and just tasting the juice that we've brought in so far, everything's tasting great, looking great. And it's nice to see so much fruit here in the Frontenac Gris.
Yeah.
It's just dripping from the vines.
Yeah, I mean, let's go to, can you introduce your your wine?
Sure.
Your brand?
Sure. So I'm Anna again, and my personal label is Lilith Wines. So it's it's an imprint of La Garagista. So we, myself, Cammy, and another coworker of ours, Willa Dealey, who's Disciple Cider, we all have our own personal projects that kind of fall under the umbrella of La Garagista. And I started venturing off, full-time into wine in 2021. And yeah, I've been fortunate enough to work with Deirdre and have the opportunity to make some of my own wine while I help her make hers.
What kind of wine?
What kind of wine? I mean, a bunch
making?
of the one wine that I have put a label on so far and really brought out into the world is called Virago, which is a pet nat. It's a blend of 75% La Crescent and 25% Brianna. And the Brianna that's in there is a bookend of harvest. So it is the very first pick of 2022 and the very last pick of 2022. And the Brianna also sat on La Crescent skins for a total of 2 weeks before I blended them together. But otherwise, everything else that I have made so far is still in process. But I never know exactly what kind of fruit I'm going to be able to work with for the vintage. It's mostly what do we have an abundance of, what are we potentially able to buy from other people, and so so far it has been very small experiments and trying new things. So I haven't necessarily made the same thing twice. So I have some other things that I'm still holding on to before releasing, which might be ready soon. And it's a series of 4 different wines made with 2 different grapes, Marquette and Frontenac Noir. And this is the first time I ever had any of my own fruit to work with, so I just wanted to kind of play around and see what I was able to do and maximize those 2 things. So I did as many combinations as I could. So I have a still Marquette, sparkling Marquette, and a co-fermentation of the Marquette and Frontenac Noir, and then the Marquette on Frontenac Noir skins. And what those all come out to is as above, so below, as within, so without. And so I was able to get some Verona and Petit Pearl from a vineyard that Cammy works with down in Perkinsville, Vermont. And she, had a lot of fruit that we harvested from there. And as a little thank you for doing her wedding photography, she's carving out some of that for me. So amazing. I'll work with that this year.
What's the name Lilith all about? I have a fondness because I am a huge fan of sirens. Yeah. And I feel like she's kind of like the mother of sirens, and there's a lot of...
Mother of demons, yeah.
There's a lot of similarities just in this, it's feminine energy that has been put in a negative light, in a way, traditionally, historically. Totally. And, it sounds like, obviously the idea of reclaiming that and owning that and, making that not a negative thing is a big part of the embrace of Lilith, which I love.
That's essentially it, but more who is Lilith, how did I, why did I, how did I? So what originally piqued my interest is I also am an astrologer, and there's a placement in astrology called Black Moon Lilith. And it's all about, you think of the story of Lilith, who is exactly like you said, mother of demons, and kind of this, wrongfully,
vilified.
Vilified, that's the right word. for basically just like standing up for herself. This astrology placement is supposed to represent kind of like those taboo or dark feminine characteristics that you may not readily accept about yourself, that are kind of maybe shunned by society or like deemed as like, oh, don't do like XYZ because that, for whatever reason. And it's kind of, how can you reclaim that as your own and do it with, confidence and kind of integrate that as a piece of your personality rather than like shying away from it. And that's just something the whole story of Lilith too, just something that really is interesting to me. I feel like it resonates, especially I was asked the question one time, how does it feel to be making wine and starting to make wine in a region that is so non-traditional and matriarchal? And I was like, wow, that really is making me stop and think a lot, because I've just kind of been here like, all right, I want to do this and these are the people doing it around me, but without necessarily thinking of it in that context. So, and I feel like that.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. All right, I'm going to move down the row here. I'll be back. Can you introduce La Montanuela?
Yes. So it is my label, which I started in 2018. So
what was your name again?
Oh, Camila Carrillo. You are welcome to call me Cami or Camila. So I started that label, my personal label, in 2018, or I guess 2019, but I started making my own wines in 2018, the first year in harvest that I worked here at La Garagista. And I released my first cuvee in 2019, and that was really just came with a lot of encouragement and support from Deirdre and Caleb, because I wasn't really sure I wanted to make wine at that time. And yeah, I've been making my own cuvées ever since and have been growing slowly but surely. And La Montanuela it was the name of my grandfather's farm, which he had outside of the capital of Venezuela, Caracas. And when he passed away in 2019, I was trying to figure out what to name my label, and just wanted to find some way to honor him since he was always so supportive and excited about what I was doing. So, per my mom's suggestion, I decided to go with it.
Why did you get into wine?
Well, it all began when I was a senior in high school, and at that time, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I had been looking into college. I was kind of thinking about doing design and merchandising, but I just wasn't really sure. And the idea of spending so much money trying to figure it out seemed wrong to me. I love traveling, and I kind of wanted to do that. So I didn't end up applying to any colleges. But during my senior year, I was dating someone whose parents were really into wine and food. And so dinners were just so amazing, because we would have great food and then great wine. And I think what attracted me really about wine was just not only the imbibing of it, but just learning about where all these wines came from and the ways that they were made and grown. And I've always loved working with nature, like gardening or just being in the woods, kind of hanging around, climbing trees. So the idea of working in agriculture or something like that was also appealing to me. And I just felt like the more I worked in wine, I felt like I was making my way to do something exactly like that.
And you had you did some staging around the world as well.
Yes. So
instead of college, you took what is that? Like a apprenticeship route.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I did that. It started in 2015 was my first harvest internship, and I did my last internship in the fall of 2017. I started in California and ended in Italy. And what I thought was kind of sweet about having my last stage in Italy was that in 2011, a year after I graduated high school, I didn't really know what I was doing with my life. I ended up going to Italy, and I did this woofing program in Tuscany, and this was a farm that made everything and made wine, and I just remember being so in love with what they were doing that I wanted to do the same. And so it was a really nice way to kind of end that cycle, I guess. So thank goodness for traveling, and honestly, apprenticeship is the way to go, because I learned so much more than I did doing WSET.
How many different wineries did you work at?
So I worked at one in California, one in Argentina, one in Washington State, Yakima Valley, Basket Range outside the Adelaide Hills in Australia, and then the last place was in Italy at La Stopa.
All very different, I imagine.
Yes.
In terms of style as well as, the terroir and everything else.
Yeah, and production.
Right.
Size
and...
Yeah.
Now, you're doing this here. This is a special and unique kind of production as well.
Yes.
Do you have anything that compares to this?
I would say
in that apprenticeship, of course.
Yeah.
Before you.
I think that honestly, it was my last two internships that I felt like were the closest to this. So, I worked for Gentlefolk Wines in Basket Range, and that was like the first real small natural wine winery that I'd worked for, and that was actually the first time that I was involved in the vines, before harvest, during harvest, and after harvest. All the other wineries, we were kind of removed from the vines. And it was just really cool to see wine made in the most, in the simplest way. Not to say that, the work wasn't hard, but the winemaking was pretty simple. And it was also the community in the Basket Range, I felt was very similar to here. Everyone's really tight, and there are a lot of people who kind of work together, inspire each other, collaborate, who do things differently, but are working in harmony with each other. And then La Stopa was the other place that my last internship that, I think, working at Garagista, there's this Italian element to it. So I felt like that was there was definitely a link. And, just most of the internships I did, I feel like lunch and meals were a really big thing, a big part of the harvest experience, and gathering at the table, cooking together, and having a long lunch. And that's how it was, in Australia and in Italy.
We just got done with a lovely long lunch.
Yes, long, lovely, with some wine and great company. So, I don't know. I feel like those last two internships were the most similar to here, even though they were thousands of miles away.
Did you ever work with hybrids before here?
Ish. In 2012, I worked at a winery in the tasting room outside of the capital, Vermont.
Okay.
Yeah, so just right outside. The winery was called Fresh Tracks, and they were not a natural winery, but they made wine with hybrids. And that was the closest I could get in Vermont to like having a winery experience. And so at that time, you know, I definitely recognized that there was a lot of potential in Vermont, and that I knew that this was like a pretty young industry at that time, but I knew that, you know, I think I felt like it was going in the right, you know, trajectory. Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with the hybrids that we work with here, is what I'm trying to say.
You make wine with only hybrids, right?
I do.
Why hybrids?
Well, Adam, to put it simply, I live in Vermont, and that's what we have here. And I think I also, given where I started in wine in Vermont and where I am now, I feel very passionate and dedicated to working with these varieties and making wines with these varieties, and also showing the world what amazing wines we can make here, and also the fact that we can farm this, you know, organically and biodynamically.
And still get grapes.
In
the worst vintage in a long
time. Yeah. So, you know, I think we're doing something right.
Oh, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Deirdre.
I'm Deirdre Heekin. Yeah.
Oh, so first of all, I want to apologize for slowing everybody down in their picking.
I wanted to talk to you about that.
Yeah, let me know. Yeah, Cammy is totally incapable of talking and using her hands.
I cannot multitask.
Oh, that's about to happen to me right now too.
What I would love to ask you, I mean, so many things, but, you know, I've been here almost 3 weeks now, learned a lot, but what do you hope that I take away?
Ooh, that's a good question. You always ask good questions. What do I hope you take away? I hope you take away something of what this place is, you know, what it wants to say in terms of its landscape and the people who, you know, you've been living and working with, and the kinds of wines that we're making and the stories that these wines want to say about this place. What these varieties that we grow here have to say about this place, and certainly what the kind of farming that we're doing has to say. All those things in concert together. What they have to say about what it means to be living and working and making wine in a place like Vermont.
Mm.
Yeah.
I have to be complimentary. I think, if anything, what is a central thing that I'm taking away with me
as we walk away,
going down the line, I can credit you of creating a culture of, I would say, fearlessness. It's very rare to see fearless farmers. We're often just, reacting out of fear and farming out of fear and making wine, like, worried at all times. And I mean, really, I was struggling with how to put it into words, but today, this morning I was thinking about that, and it's like, this idea of, like, you can't screw it up. It's part of, we're part of a process that's already happening, and just trying to participate in it in a harmonious way.
Right.
It's a very, it's a relief to work in this way. Yeah.
Yes.
Not worried all the time, not in fear, but also, there's, the other complimentary thing I want to say, and I'll lead to a question, hopefully, or you can comment, but I feel like, you especially have this really amazing ability to observe, to listen to where the wine is going, and this whole idea of, like, terroir, that it's more than just, the fact that we're on a couple feet of topsoil over some limestone. It's more about, like, these vines grow in a certain way every year. They have a certain chemistry. They have a certain flavor. If you don't mess with them, they have a voice that you can listen to and learn from, and they will make a wine that's beautiful and unique without having to force it into a specific idea of what it should be. And that, how did you cultivate that? That's my question.
Another good question, which is just my stalling technique to think of my answer to this good question. Well, I think, that is how I've always approached wine from a hospitality side, or my understanding of wine that I appreciated and I enjoyed and wanted to put on our wine list at our restaurant. When we had our restaurant, were wines that were, certainly spoke of place. And, as I began to learn more about the producers we were working with, would visit them, and I learned so much from them about approaching wine in this way, that it's a natural process, and if we accompany the wine rather than trying to manipulate the wine will lead us to where we want to go. And it's always unexpected, which is part of the beauty of it all and the fun of it all, is that it's like writing. It's a surprise, right? You may set out with a specific idea of where you're going while you're writing, but then things pop up that surprise you. And I find, working with vines and making wine is very much the same thing. And that is something I think that was just really instilled in me and us when we would go see these other producers who would share their stories and their wines with us, that these wines were made in that way. They led them down the merry path of what they wanted to express and who they wanted to be and what they had to say about where they were grown and the people that were growing them and making the wine. And it really honestly didn't cross my mind to approach it any other way. I'm not, I didn't go to enology school. I'm not a UC Davis graduate.
Yeah.
I actually never interned with anyone. But I did have this very rich opportunity to talk and taste with producers from a buyer's perspective. And I was able to, as we started this project, to ask a lot of questions of people that we had relationships with already from the restaurant side of things. So I felt like we created our own school, with our own faculty that became invested in us in this project and helping us to figure out that the less is more. The less you do, the more the wine has to say, because you're letting the wine speak, and you're letting the land speak, and you're letting the farming speak, rather than imposing your ego onto it. I don't know if that answered your question at all, but
no, that's great. That's great. It seems like the result of that is with every meal we've had one or two wines. Often we taste wines that we've been picking in or working with that day, and I haven't had a bad wine, and I haven't had a wine that is like any other wine I've ever had before.
Oh.
And I mean, there's similarities, of course, but they're all unique and delicious. And what are we picking now? Like, what do you envision for this, or how we decide?
So we're picking Frontenac Gris. We're knee deep in switchgrass and daisy fleabane and a lot of vetch, and as we typically make 4 wines. No, wait a minute. 3, 4. How many wines do we make from this? I guess 3. Nope, 4. I was right the first time. I mean, we make 4,576 wines. So
Right.
sometimes I just lose track. So we make 4 wines from this. And as we're picking, my mind is going click, 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 click. You know, this fruit looks like and tastes like it wants to go into this wine. This other fruit looks like it wants to go into this wine. And we'll make those decisions once we bring all the fruit in and we see what there is and what it wants to be once it starts getting into fermentation. So, you know, I'm going to say we make 5 wines from the Frontenac Gris. We make what's a less ripe or typically an earlier pick so that it leans more towards white rather than the rosé. We do a sparkling petnat with that. We can't do that every year because sometimes we just can't catch that window of what that optimum level of ripeness is for that particular wine. We sometimes go past it too quickly. But I think we have an opportunity to make it this year. And we also make a rosé petnat, which is called Chicon Fondé Rosé. That has always kind of been a calling card wine for us. From pretty early on, we started making it in 2013. We make a Ramato called Lupo in Boca, which has a little bit of skin contact, but is really more about oxygen. We also make an oxidative. Camila and I have a project together that's an oxidative Frontenac Gris, kind of in the it's what we call an Alpine Solera. It's in the style of sherry, called Flora. That's made with this, and then we also do a co-fermentation with cider between the Frontenac Gris and our cider base, and that's called Florine. So we have an opportunity to make a lot of different things, and depending on what the season gives us, we can go in any or all of those directions.
Right.
There may also be wines that we've never made before that the fruit will lead us in that direction, which is why we have so many labels. Because I'm a firm believer in not trying to necessarily duplicate. We don't have to make the same thing every year. Great if we can, and we have wonderful vintage variation each year within a specific wine. But if that wine just can't be made that year, so be it. You know, we'll make something else, and that's okay, and that's exciting. It keeps it intriguing.
Yeah, that's what I was liking. That's my style as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, I like that a lot because as a creative person with ADHD, variety is helpful.
Yes, it is.
But it's also, it grows out of nature.
Yes.
Because every year is different. Every vintage is different.
Right, exactly.
How would you describe this vintage?
Challenging. We haven't had, I would say the vintage most similar to this was probably 2011, which we had a hurricane at the end of August 31st, and that definitely impacted the vineyards and the fruit and the wines of that year. All super resilient, as everything has been this year, but we've basically had, nonstop either flooding or threat of flooding since end of June, beginning of July.
Because of pretty much nonstop rain, right?
Nonstop rain, punctuated by beautiful days of very intense heat. So it's been all over the place in terms of our of the growing season. And we started off harvest with a fair amount of rain, and now we're, in a spate of beautiful, hot, dry, sunny weather. So, and that looks like it's going to keep up for the next week, which we're, I think, all hopeful about.
Yeah, this is the first non-rainy week since I've been here.
I've lost track.
Yeah.
So, I know we've had some nice days, but...
Yeah, it's really funny coming from a Mediterranean dry climate.
Yeah.
being like, whoa, so, okay, it's just going to rain, like, during harvest. Like, yeah, that's all right.
Right, and you just have to cope with that.
Yeah, these vines seem to be okay. The grapes seem to be okay.
I think, as Camila and Anna were saying earlier, while it has been so challenging, what we're seeing coming off the vine is a testament to the resilience of these plants in this place, and that is reassuring and exciting, and edifying, and all those things.
Sure, we can move down.
So it's, I feel excited about what we've been picking and what we have the opportunity to make this year. We also had late frost in May, and some of the blocks of grapes in the vineyards have much lower yields, but that's okay. We've got a lot of Frontenac Gris, so that's going to make up for some of that. But we also have a lot of apples. We've got a lot of pears at the home farm this year, so we're going to be able to make more of those wines. So, at the end of the day, my experience has been when one thing is not available, something else comes in its stead.
Well, some technical questions.
Okay.
That and based on observations.
Yeah.
You're not really. There's no real lab in Vermont.
No.
You're not really taking measurements. You're going on taste. Is that right? Pretty much.
Yeah. We do use a refractometer and we use a hydrometer. And the refractometer will start taking Brix levels, sugar levels in August.
Okay.
And we'll do that every week for a few weeks, just so that we can track the rate of ripening, so that we can kind of zero in on a picking date, a start date.
Got it.
For the start of harvest. And then once we know that, we stop. And then we just start tasting. And, each of us, for all of our own wines we have specific ways that we're looking, we have specific things that we're looking for, that the grapes will say to us that it's time to pick for this certain thing. So we kind of wait for that magic moment. And I guess we've been lucky that it always comes.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a moment yet where we're like, oh no, it's not happening.
Well,
it's almost November. So we use that refractometer, and then we use a hydrometer to measure sugar for the wines that we bottle as pet nats, just to make sure we're being clear and safe, and we know what's what when it goes into the bottle.
And we were talking about it, but without you being close by, and just to go over your spray program for this.
Oh, yeah.
What else is in this vineyard too? So, two questions.
In this particular vineyard, there is also Marquette, there is La Crescent, and there's Brianna, in addition to the Frontenac Gris. It's 4 acres. The spray program here is predominantly, we usually start, it's usually at the beginning of June that we start, and we go till the end of July, 3rd or 4th week of July typically. And we do 2 sets of sprays for each. It's every other week. And we use homeopathic doses of OMRI certified sulfur and copper, but those are always blended with plant teas as well. And we always have nettle tea in the spray. At the beginning of the season, we use horsetail. That's about 99% silica, and that's good for us in this humid and often hot part of the season. And we stop using that typically, mid-June, late June at the longest. We incorporate kaolin clay after the horsetail, and that is used as both a sticking agent. It's a great way to help the teas and the minerals come into the plant. It's like an intermediary. It also has silica in it, so it brings in heat and light into the vineyard, which is something we're always kind of looking for. It also is a great deterrent for things like Japanese beetles, which can be a real issue here. And that's kind of the basic. Those are the basics. We have a lot of plants, other plants growing on the vineyard floor within each vineyard. And if there are certain issues that crop up, we will turn to those plants to make teas. We'll try and understand and research and understand how those plants might be useful in the spray program. We also use, we do a 500 typically in the spring, once or twice. It depends on the vineyard and how old the vineyard is and how it's doing. And then we'll also sometimes do that again at the post-harvest.
Okay.
Again, depending on the vineyard.
Okay. I'm going to move down the line.
Yeah.
After I grab these grapes. I'm not doing.
Thank you.
Anna.
Adam.
Deirdre mentioned Chiconfunde Rosé.
Yes.
Chiconfunde.
Yes. A very special wine for me, personally.
Yes. Can you talk about why?
Yeah, so that is actually the first La Garagista wine that I had before I really knew who La Garagista was and what they were all about. This was kind of at the very beginning of me dipping my toe into the world of wine, and specifically natural wine, a lot more seriously as well. So I was at a local wine bar, and Chiconfunde Rosé was one of the things that was being poured by the glass. The bar was completely packed, and when I had ordered a half glass, all that was left in the bottle was a quarter of a glass, and I was like, okay, I'll have this. And the person behind the bar said, I'm gonna open another bottle, let me know when you're ready for the next pour. And I maybe had another glass of something in between, but while I was waiting for them to circle back around and give me my other half of a half, but by the time they made it back, they're like, we actually sold out of everything else because everybody else wanted a pour of it. But anyway, so all that to say, I literally had a quarter of a glass of Chiconfunde Rosé, and my mind hasn't probably never been blown in the same way again. And I was just like, what is going on? How did this get to be what it is? And my background is in environmental science and economics, and so I was just kind of like, how do you create this thing from, how does it become this thing that I love so much? And that's kind of where I started going down the very deep rabbit hole.
Well, now you've helped make it.
Yeah.
and not that vintage, obviously.
No.
Other vintages. Why is it so good?
I mean, so something that has been made very apparent to me as I have spent more time on the other end of, the consumption process, on the actual production side of things. Mm-hmm. I've started to realize how bottles of wine like that are an extension of the winemaker themselves, and I really feel like those kinds of wines that have a lasting impression on me, or just even like, you know, when somebody takes care of, is really being a steward to the land and to the vines. It's like a piece of art. The wine is like the heart and soul of the winemaker, and to me that's just like something really beautiful that you can't really capture, I feel like, in a lot of other things that you consume in that way. Like food, yes, you can like create a beautiful meal, and I guess that's not fair to say, because I'm going to backtrack on that.
But it's one of the things that is definitely capable of capturing that, right?
Yeah, and I feel like for me specifically, wine is in its own category, and just like what it's able to capture and like tell me, and it really is like a piece of art to me. And that's kind of something that I like about it so much.
So that's hard to replicate, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like
we can't get the recipe to Chicken Funde.
No.
Like.
No, and it's interesting too, because I mean, even if there was a recipe and you tried to recreate it, it would probably taste different. And I say that because there have been a couple of us who have had the same fruit to work with at any one time, have processed it all together, and the juice gets like divided up between three of us, and we won't do anything differently necessarily. It's just divided, and we check on it different times. But they will all taste very different, right. And they will all kind of have their own signature to them that like we can be like, oh, okay, there's a common thread between like all of Willa's wines or like all of Cammy's wines, and mine or Deirdre's, and it's just the energy and like what you're putting into it, which all sounds very like woo woo, but I mean, we're all a bunch of floating particles bound together by energy. So why wouldn't that make sense?
Why wouldn't it be woo woo?
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Cammy's wines, Cammy, I had your Solera style. That was delicious. I'm not a huge fan, or haven't been a huge fan of sherry until I tried your wines.
Oh, man.
And really wanted to try more, and I can't wait for your release, which is coming out.
Well, hopefully, if the TTV gets on their, their whatever, hopefully that will be out into the world in early mid-November.
Okay. Cool.
Yep, hoping to pour it at Raw, New York, so it's going to be huge. I've been waiting 5 years for this moment.
Why Solera style for you? I know it's not the only thing you do, but why did you want to do a Solera style?
So I was at a wine fair, this was with a friend when I was actually in Lima. No, scratch that, delete. Okay, so the first time I tried sherry was actually in Barcelona. It was at a restaurant with a friend, and I remember very first time I tasted it, I was like floored. I mean, there was something so, it's very different from like all of the other styles of wines I've had before. Mm-hmm. And I think it just like drew me in. I wanted to know more. There was this, sophistication about it. I loved the nutty kind of savory elements to it. And I don't know, I wanted to learn more about it. So through my internships, I had other kind of examples like Vin Jaune and, other oxidative styles of wines. And when I knew I was coming back to Vermont, I was thinking a lot about, if the grapes that were grown here could make something of that style. And so when I started working with Deirdre in 2018, she asked me, what my interests were, and I mentioned sherry, and that's kind of how our project began, which started, I guess, before my time, really, at La Garagista, but we went through some vessels, some demijohns and carboys of 2014 La Crescent and some Marquettes. And they were tasting so great and so interesting after all that time that they really, I guess, wanted to be, part of this oxidative project. And so, that's kind of how that began. And when I started making my own cuvées, I had these small amounts of La Crescent and Frontenac Gris. And since I didn't really feel like it was worth it to bottle anything, since it was, so little, I decided that's when I would start my, the base of the Solera. And so I've been adding, small amounts each year.
You have 2 different Soleras, right?
Yeah, so I have 2. I have a La Crescent and Frontenac Gris, and I split the La Crescents. So I got this amazing, my distributor, Jose Pastor, bless you, hooked us up with some Coda 45 Amontillado barrels, 2 that were 50 years old and 2 that were 100 years old. They looked like they came off a pirate ship.
Yeah.
He sent them over to us, and so I ended up splitting my La Crescent. I took half of that and I put it into my barrel and the other half in glass. And really why I did that was, for the glass, I wanted people to have an opportunity to taste, Vermont, the expression of Vermont without the influence of the barrel. And then obviously, the barrel really is just like an ode to the wines that started it all. And I'm a huge fan of Coda 45, so it was like really that's just an amazing gift to receive some of these barrels. So yeah.
Nice. Do you have a favorite grape? Three questions. Favorite taste, favorite in the vineyard, and then overall favorite.
Like of the hybrids?
Any grape, but I would assume.
Yeah, okay. Well, that narrows it down. Good. Okay, wait, sorry. My favorite grape?
Yeah.
Frontenac Gris.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, like Anna, the first wine that Chico Fuente Rosé wasn't the first Garagista wine I tried, but it was the one that really spoke to me. And Frontenac in general, just eating it off the vine, it's incredible. There's so much depth, and it's the color, the acid, the fruit flavors. I'm growing up in between Colombia and Venezuela. When I was a child, I just had, grew up with an abundance of tropical fruits. A lot of sour fruit. I love sour. I love acid. And so Frontenacs have a lot of that. But they also have a lot of amazing characteristics. And it's very versatile.
Nice.
What were your other questions?
Well, just is it your overall favorite as well, besides the flavor? Do you like it in the vineyard? Do you like it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say, something that's very appealing about it are the long, loose bunches. So, you don't really have to worry too much about a lot of disease within the cluster because there's a lot of, airflow that goes through them. And no,
these grapes are remarkably
Yeah.
healthy, given
Yeah.
the year that you guys have had.
Well, and I was thinking too, like, I was kind of concerned when the frost hit that, like, Frontenac was not, you know, going to withstand it. I had just planted 200 Frontenac, or I was about to plant 200 Frontenac vines of Frontenac Blanc, so I was kind of, like, freaking out. But I'm, like, really, I feel like the Frontenac Gris has, I mean, other than the Brianna, I feel like it has survived what I thought was going to be devastating. I mean, like, there's so much of it, and it looks really great. So I feel pretty confident in growing these.
Okay.
And they're just so versatile.
You know?
Yeah, they're incredible. Favorite grape?
Ooh, I think... Oh, it might be La Crescent. I mean,
for the flavor or for everything?
For everything, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it has Gewürztraminer in its parentage.
Okay.
And that is also one of my favorite grapes. So I know it gets kind of shit on a lot, but
why?
I don't know. I feel like people, I don't know, sometimes because it can be very floral, it can be very aromatic, but like...
You say that like it's a bad thing.
I know, that's like, great for me, like give me, your perfumey skin contact wines, like I love that. And I feel like, like Crescent, I mean, it definitely will shine through, and I feel like you'll be like, okay, this definitely has the Crescent in it if you're drinking something, but I feel like there's a lot that can be done with it as well. I mean, there's so much that can be done with all of the hybrid grapes, and I feel like we're in an especially unique advantage because we don't have really preconceived notions of what they should be. And so I think we kind of have some built-in, or a lot more flexibility in terms of like what expectations around wines made with hybrid grapes should be like. And so it gives us room to play.
Nice. No pressure, right?
Yeah, in some ways yes, or some ways no. I mean,
well, the only pressure is that everybody that comes after you are setting the example for. No pressure.
Okay, no pressure. None at all. Again, hadn't thought of that. Thank you, Adam.
Do you have a favorite grape?
I'm an equal opportunist.
Yeah, I had a feeling.
Yeah, I love them all for different reasons. I mean, I love all the ones that we grow. Certainly, the Frontenac Gris and the La Crescent, like Camilla and Anna talked about, Marquette is beautiful. I love Frontenac Noir. We have some Frontenac Blanc, which I think is super interesting, and we're starting to work a little bit more with that as a single variety.
We had that delicious.
Oh my gosh, Willa's beautiful Frontenac Blanc from David Kett's Fruit. Honeybee is gorgeous. And that wine really inspired, I think, all of us about Frontenac Blanc. And we have Saint Croix, which I love. For us, where we grow it in the mountains, it's been a really easy keeper, juicy, fruity. It's a really nice component in the wines that come out of the mountains. But I'm also really interested in exploring more with that as a Blanc de Blanc, actually, because it's one of the only red fruits that are white fleshed. Yeah. That we could do something like that with.
Bear's saying on the record that so many of the red hybrids are Tenturier.
Yeah,
really, and so I have lots of pictures of my hands being
exactly.
deep magenta from picking.
Exactly.
You didn't mention Brianna. Do you hate Brianna?
Oh my God, no! I forgot about Brianna. Brianna, I'm so sorry. We're right next to you. Of course, and everybody, that
Brianna's
comes
amazing.
Here, they fall in love with Brianna.
Yeah, I have fallen in love with Brianna.
Start to pick it. She is just really charismatic and kind of captivating. So yes, we love Brianna. How can I forget her?
And we were bringing up, I'll just put it on the record as well, the sort of the lesser ripe Brianna has this petrol thing that reminded me a lot of Riesling.
Yes, yeah.
So you could probably play with that where you pick it in its ripening phase to get some of that, if you wanted that, if you like that, if you love a Riesling. I don't think Riesling's even in its parentage. It just has that in it.
It just there's something about it when it goes through fermentation that starts to throw those kind of pyrazine elements, which is, or at least that's been our experience with it. And it too is one of those grapes that can do a lot of different things. We make a handful of wines from it. Earlier picks, later picks. We're really gravitating towards later picks with it. It tends to be the last thing that we pick here in the Champagne Valley. Rule of thumb for most people is pick Brianna early.
Really?
Yeah, when it's between 16 and 18 bricks, because it's a grape that doesn't gain more sugar, too much more sugar than that as it ripens on the vine, but we find that that's really interesting. It maintains this sugar of, say, about 22 bricks, and then it starts to accumulate all these other interesting phenolics when we let it hang longer. Plus, it's really sturdy. You know, if we've got rain, if we've got other heat, other climactic conditions during harvest, it holds up really well. And it's the one that can kind of hang in there till the bitter end. You can get some sour rot.
And this year I think anything could get sour rot. I think there was the best ones, the best conditioned grapes so far that I've seen were Petite Pearl and the Frontenacs. Pretty much. Right.
Exactly.
Petite Pearl probably just because of the genetics and because it's for whatever reason, but the Frontenacs because of the loose long clusters.
For sure. I think that has a big impact. And Brianna is a really tight cluster.
But we saw some nice Brianna too, right? I guess we weren't picking it, so we don't know how much of it was.
So you and I have talked about this before, about how we've moved to doing sections of our Brianna unpruned.
Right.
Because it elongates the cluster.
And
that we get more air passage. So that we can really let hang longer, and we don't suffer any sour rot. The things that are, it's more traditional tight bunch that comes from the pruned vines, that we have to watch a little bit more carefully.
While we walk,
let's walk through.
The technical question I have for you is, why didn't you prune the Frontenac Gris, or the ones that we're with right now?
That is also kind of based on flavor profile and yields. And the things that we picked earlier today that I think you saw were on unpruned vines and a little less ripe. Because they do ripen later.
Is this pruned?
This is not pruned. These last 3 rows are not pruned.
Right.
So if we want to make this very specific wine that is from a less ripe Frontenac Gris, this is really helpful. It also helps us delay the ripening so that we can manage our schedule, our picking schedule, just logistically, because we're a super small winery, a super small crew, and we can't really have everything ripening all at once, which is of course what it wants to all do.
Right.
So this is a great delaying tactic. We also found this year, which is going to make us think more about this for some of the other varieties, that with the late frost in May, the unpruned vines did much better in terms of loss. So, and certainly things that were pruned later. So,
right.
I think there are a host of reasons that we find really interesting in employing some unpruned rows within each block. They just give us a little bit more flexibility.
Will you prune this again this year and maybe switch up some of the rows?
Yeah, that's exactly what we'll do.
Do the rotation, rotate some in, rotate some out.
Yep, so this year we will definitely prune these rows that were unpruned last year, and we may do a complete swap, or we may just do 2 rows. We haven't decided that yet. We'll sort of look at our program for the year and see what we want to do for each variety. But yeah.
A couple days ago, I think, am I ready to ask you this question?
Am I ready to answer this question? That may be the better question.
Before that question, we've been talking a lot about who decides what is the right flavor for things, and that being a rhetorical question, right? Because obviously it's subjective, and yet there's this seeming consensus in the way that people talk about wine in our dominant wine culture that is very exclusive of, some of these grapes, for example, and some of the styles that you might want to explore, or some of the non-grape fruit that people might want to work with because it does better than grapes in their region. Do you have any thoughts about that? I'm trying to remember like what we were talking about,
What we
but
were-
I mean,
how
the
we
one
solved that question.
we've already answered this, so
Yeah.
it's like. But I think I'll go back to my own thing because I always like to relate it to my own prejudice. But like when I first, the first thing that I worked with was La Crescent, and we're in the vineyard, and it was just kind of. I wasn't used to seeing vineyards that look like this. Like,
Yeah.
messy is one way to look at it, but it's like, like, but not, I mean, there's...
We think of it as natural.
natural, right.
A little Fauvis, a little...
Right, then even, like, right, I know.
Yeah,
my
no,
point
I'm
being, I'm
teasing.
making fun of myself for being judgmental
Yeah.
about it, but, and then being like, if you did this and that, wouldn't you get more, even ripening or blah blah blah, and then immediately like your response made me immediately be like, oh yeah, what, like, to what end? Like, why am I trying to ripen them all the same? Like,
Right,
your
yeah.
point being that you get complexity, you get interest in the wine by not having everything be this regimented strict thing, because like what are you trying to grow that strictly for? Like what is that end game that you
Right.
think you have to reach? Like why not focus on health and let the flavor be an expression of that health, however that health wants, however the vines best are healthy,
Yeah.
this being a very good example of that, like
Yeah.
we've fleabane up onto the second cordon, we've got, sometimes we have little trees that grow up above the vines, It's, you're creating this forest edge ecology, as you talk about, by letting this be that, almost in that state of dynamic succession in the
Yes,
ecology.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, and I think that's, if we look at it from a growing perspective, it's, I want to look at how nature operates and fermentation as part of that. Nature does not work in a way that everything is going to ripen equally and optimally at the same time, right? There is variation. So if we're trying to encourage that same kind of dynamic within the vineyard, that's something that if we observe that in the wild and in grapes in the wild, then that's something we want to observe also in the dynamic we're trying to create within the vineyard. But then you also look at how does that taste, right? Does that work?
Right.
Will we enjoy that,
Right.
making wine with grapes that have variation in ripeness, say. And we found that, we do. And that it does.
Right.
It does bring this sort of, these layers and complexity to the wine, and an energy and a vibrancy.
Right.
Having, deeply ripened grapes along with less ripe fruit, there's a tension.
Yeah.
It's sort of the same idea of what led us to make our wine Loup Garou with Frontenac Noir the way we make it,
Right.
which is basically an on-the-vine ripasso,
Right,
where we let a portion of the bunch raisinate, and then the rest of the bunch is what would be typically, fresh ripe fruit. We take the whole bunch all together. We harvest it all together, destem it, crush it all together, and it does open vat fermentation on skins for a period of time. That gives that wine a tension and an energy. And I find having this variation in ripeness does that with all of the wines that we see coming out of these vineyards. That we find exciting and interesting and pleasurable, and so we're actually going for that.
Yeah.
Rather than saying like, ooh, okay, let's create a scenario in which we have a lot of control and we can manage the ripeness equally in each bunch. It just doesn't seem as interesting at
Yeah.
this juncture.
It's also a lot more work for what end? You know
Right,
what I mean? Like,
right.
like what
Yeah.
do you actually get for all that extra,
Exactly.
OCD behavior,
Right.
Yeah, it's, and, right, like really just tying the vines onto, something that they, it's, I'm thinking
They're
of
arbitrary. These decisions are arbitrary.
mosquito on your forehead. So I wasn't just smacking
That
you.
was also arbitrary.
The macro of that is the way that hybrids are, of course, seen. I think in the realm of taste in wine, in some circles, in many non-hybrid circles, in the sense that they're. I like the metaphor, I guess is what I'm saying. What you're saying, the farming metaphor, the imitating nature metaphor, I wish applied and want to apply to all wine, where it's, you're looking at the natural system, how it's growing, letting it grow the way it wants to grow. In this case, nothing but these kind of grapes could grow here to be made wine.
Yes.
And so, this is clearly an expression of this area, that what is possible, what can speak to this place.
Yeah.
In the same way that, you're not trying to control by forcing vinifera to grow here, right?
Right. Well, and we're not trying to control, we're not trying to make Marquette taste like Cabernet Sauvignon.
Right.
Right? And fit into a box, a preconceived box of, what is wine? What is good wine? What is elegant, elevated wine?
Yeah.
That's futile, because that will never, Marquette is never going to taste like Cabernet Sauvignon.
Right.
And it's going to taste like Marquette, which I'm thankful for, right?
Yeah.
But it's, something we've talked about before, too, is this idea of, the arbitrariness of taste, and how did we get to a place of, wine should taste this way. And, somewhere along the line, people were like, hybrids are weird. Hybrids taste weird. They've got a flavor, which drives me insane. The comment foxy.
Right.
Because I don't really understand what that means.
Right.
To me, it sounds like that should be animalistic. But that isn't what I get from these grapes.
No.
Sometimes they taste like grapes.
Yeah, they have like a grape flavoring.
Right, and maybe that's what people mean by foxy. I don't know, but it's like, why doesn't it just taste like what it is?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's either well made or it's not. It's well grown or it's not. And we use that as the deciding factor.
Right.
And is it sound? Is it balanced? Is it, we can look at things like that.
Yeah.
Is it flawed? I think we can probably all agree on some basic ideas of what a flaw is.
Right.
Not everything, but some things. So if we just are shifting our focus and saying, well, this is what wine tastes like from this place, without having, these preconceived notions of,
right.
it has to, good wine is always Bordeaux or Burgundy or,
right.
Something from the Jura or, whatever these things are that we
right.
have, Chianti, Nebbiolo. I learned a lot from, being a student of Italian wine, that regional wine is what is so important in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it has to be from that region to go with the food. And that is what tastes good.
Mm.
Oh, we have a little mouse somewhere. Oh,
okay.
Where?
Don't you run away?
Yeah.
I don't know why you're just squeaking. You could run.
I don't know. Interesting. Okay.
Maybe.
I just wanted to interject here that even though we were talking about foxiness and this flavor in hybrid grapes, it's really important that you should understand, if you aren't familiar working with hybrids, that most of these grapes, or many of these hybrid grapes, don't have that flavor. In fact, of the grapes that we are working with in this vineyard, and pretty much all of the vineyards that I've worked with in the past 3 weeks, only the Brianna has a bit of that flavor that has been classified as foxy. And it's also one of our favorite grapes, so there you go. But literally none of the other ones, all the ones that we've been talking about, the ones that we're picking in as we're recording this, have no trace of that foxy flavor. So part of that idea that all hybrids are foxy is just something that's wrong and comes from a earlier time or just ignorance. And I wanted to make that clear.
Well,
Didn't see him.
okay.
There's where we set our thing right down on their house.
Maybe. We were talking about a place like in Italy.
Yeah.
And regional varieties, and how it's really just about what comes from that place. It's not like, certainly there was a moment in Italian wine history fairly recently where it was like, everything has to be the international variety.
Right.
We all want to be growing Syrah and Cabernet and
Right.
Chardonnay because that's what's going to sell, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
But,
Not every region did that.
not every region did that, and fortunately it's gone back to being about the regional grapes from the regions, and that is what the experience of that culture and cuisine and those wines are about.
Yeah.
So it's like I think we should be treating Vermont in the same way, and hybrids grown wherever they grow well should be treated in that way. They just happen to be the varieties grown in that place, and they taste like they taste from that place. It's not about the variety.
Right.
It's like people get so hung up on what's the variety.
Yeah.
It's really about like what's the biome.
Yeah.
Let's
yeah.
talk about what grows in the vineyard with the variety.
Yeah.
What's the soil? What's the farming? That's what it's about, and
Yeah.
about the people,
Yeah.
who are doing the work.
Yeah. As Anna was saying, that
Yeah.
can taste that. I don't think I was complimentary enough about your wine. The first wine I had was that first day of picking La Crescent and drinking Vino Yanku.
Oh, we had the Vino Yanku,
which is
right?
very sad that won't be happening this year.
I know.
But I'm not the only person. I've heard multiple people go, "Oh no!"
Oh no, I know.
It's a really special wine. I mean, it's. Could you describe it? It's just because I don't.
Yeah,
I'm only.
it's it's a very classically made skin contact white.
Which makes it sound so simple, but it also had oxidative elements to it. I think for me, but with all
yeah.
the fruit as well.
Yep.
There was a depth to it that was.
Well, I think La Crescent is primed for
got that.
having skin contact.
Yeah.
skin
Oh, it's such a
fermented.
beautiful. Yeah.
Wine. I think it just really it loves it because it has these beautiful tea tannins. It's got stone fruit. It's got citrus. Like in the Vino Yanku, you get these deep orange and blood orange citrus elements. Apricot. What's the other one I was thinking of? That's peach. And apricot for stone fruit. It's got acidity. So we pick it at the moment where we think the fruit is saying all of those things. It has salinity. There's a lot of salinity. And then it simply... we use a lot of oxygen in the winemaking. It gets destemmed, it gets foot crushed. It's an open vat fermentation until that fermentation is done, generally. And then some of it goes into a clay amphora made with clay from the Champlain Valley Basin. And it gets blended with the other part, which may be, in flex tank, maybe in glass demijohn, a combination thereof. And it typically takes, a year. I wish it was only an hour. Wish I could be making it every day.
That's a cash cow.
Yeah, exactly. A year of that kind of élevage, and then it goes into bottle for at least another year. And then, we sort of wait till it's ready to share. And it is simple. It is simple, but it's we don't need to make the winemaking complicated in order to have a complex wine.
Yeah. No, it's lovely and should be tried by all.
Oh, I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Oh, all of them. I mean, yeah. I'm glad you had a big pear year this year, too, after that beginning of memory cider last night.
I'm excited about the pears this year.
Anna, I love what you said about a matriarchy. That is a cool idea, and I hadn't framed Vermont in that way, but I've been saying, like, you know, Deirdre has been sort of mentoring a whole new generation of people in Vermont, and I call it, like, fine natural wine. But you're right, like, there is this element of, I joke, a coven.
You're not the only person who jokes about that.
Like, I don't know. I want you to say more about that. That's really interesting.
I mean, it's really interesting. So I kind of, I moved to Vermont in 2017. I grew up in New Jersey. And making wine was never anything that crossed my mind as a possibility. I've always really enjoyed it. My dad has always really been into wine, but it's kind of like the classic. I like, a big dry red. Give me a Malbec, and that's kind of how I started off my journey in wine as well. Kind of leading up to that faded Chicken Fondé rosé quarter of a glass pour, and then I was just like, all right, I gotta figure out how to do this. But lucky enough, so starting in 2019 was when I started helping out here at La Garagista with harvest, and gradually just kind of being more involved in any way I could. And Deirdre and Caleb being very encouraging of that. And since then, I feel like the amount of people I've seen or come through to either help harvest, or having known or tried La Garagista wines, and coming to this place, whether it's, they happen to be visiting in Vermont and do a curbside bottle pickup, or we had a Tavernetta pop-up event, the amount of people I've seen who are like, okay, I'm gonna move to Vermont, and people who have literally, up and left, all different places across the country to be like, I want to be in Vermont because of the experience I've had here, and now I also want to make wine. Which a lot of those people are women.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, I wish would go home. No, it's really kind of amazing how much the community is growing, and I feel like so much of that is, because a direct, result of Deirdre and Caleb and Cammy, and how, I don't know, I feel like this is how they've made me feel, and I feel like I'm probably not the only one who has been made to feel this way, but anything is possible. And so I was able to finally quit my corporate job and take the plunge and into the great unknown, and start making my own wine. But I think, especially wine, historically being very kind of especially a lot of manual labor being involved in the farming too. It's from what Cammy's told me of her past harvest experiences, sometimes it can be like, oh, like you don't lift that, like I'll lift that for you because, you know, you're a woman. But it's very, very empowering to be here and do everything that we're doing. Whether or not I've realized it in the moment or only upon, you know, further reflection, like I'm doing in this conversation now, but it is
getting me all emotional hearing it. That's great.
Yeah.
Cammy, have you ever been asked a question that you didn't answer the way you wanted and wish you'd answered differently after you thought about it? And what was that question, and what would you have said?
Oh my God. Is this what we were talking about?
Yeah.
Didn't you just ask me that question?
Didn't you have any other questions? And did you like the way you answered it this time?
Oh God, now I am like, it's my mind is blank. You know what? I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night and remember exactly what I wanted to say. So, do you remember?
Make sure you silence your phone.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That late night call. Well, or when it comes out and you'll be like, damn it, I said what?
Yeah. I mean, it was, you know, the hybrid question that you asked me, that was something that I wish I had more time to think about. And it's always like tell us about your journey or your story. Like that's something that I always...
You want to get more polished at...
Yeah, because I'm like, where do I even begin? And then it's just me blabbing and bouncing between decades and countries, and then I feel like I'm lost. And so if I'm lost, then you're lost, I'm sure.
Well, I asked Deirdre, but I'll ask you in a sort of different way. Like, what you hope that I take away from this, but in the sense of like, what do you feel like are the most important things that you've been learning since you got here? Since you started this journey?
Well, really, you know, to Anna's point, it's been a journey of empowerment and believing in, you know, myself. And that, you know, that started with my first harvest internship. Shout out to Chantal for them of Flowers, Vineyard and Winery.
Nice.
Love you. Yeah, no, she, like, just... I've actually, almost all of my harvest internships were with female winemakers. And
Amazing.
that was, like, a really important part of the journey for me, and has, you know, been a huge part of the journey here. And, you know, when I came back to Vermont to work with Deirdre and Caleb, I wasn't really planning on making my own wine, and that was kind of the belief that I, like, couldn't do it. And I think that was, you know, fed to me by people who really didn't believe that you could make wine unless you went to college or were, like, good at chemistry and all that stuff. And so since I was not and didn't go, I basically was like, well, I'll just work for someone and, you know, figure it out. But when I started working with them, they, you know, encouraged me to make my own cuvee. And I was really hesitant to do it because I was kind of like, you know, talking down to myself about it.
Oh, Anna left. I was good. Caleb, are you listening to something?
Sort of.
Can you talk about your role here?
Sure. What is my role here?
That's a great question.
I actually was going to say that none of this would be happening if Caleb wasn't here. He is the keystone. No, come back.
I gotta get a log.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead, I'll be right back.
We'll talk about you while you're gone.
I want you to come back, but I did want to just acknowledge. I wanted to acknowledge that he is pretty much the keystone to making this whole operation work.
All of these beautiful...
If this whole thing were a restaurant, I'd be the dishwasher.
The dishwasher.
Well,
and
because
stuff.
if the dishwasher
Yeah.
walks out, the whole thing comes to a screeching
Right,
halt.
right. There you go.
So anyway, he can finish answering his own question. But I just wanted to say we love him and acknowledge how much he does to make this whole thing happen.
He works with so many women all the time, and he is still here to tell the tale. So that makes him a very strong man.
Well, the specific thing I was going to talk about was how instrumental were you in getting these squawkers? And by the squawkers, they're off right now, right? I haven't been hearing anything.
We'll see. They might be on a pause, or we may need to go reboot it.
Yeah, like,
But we're a little bit farther away, and we might not be hearing it.
oh,
They
there it
are.
is. There it comes.
Yeah, after putting nets on for a couple of years and pulling dead bird carcasses out after harvest, when we would pick the nets up to put them away, I reached a point where I just knew that I didn't want to deter birds in that way from the crop. It really put me in a depressed state to do that. There were already squawkers. There was already a squawker in place in the other vineyard, and I researched those some more, and we decided to try those out. Trying to balance all the factors, like what's the cost, the time, and the effort of putting nets on and taking them off again.
Right.
It's a lot of time. Of course, as a piece of equipment, the squawkers have a price, but I thought that the trade-off was a valuable one. And I think there was something in my tone of voice when I said, I'm not doing this anymore with the nets. That
Was heard.
Deirdre heard, and she's like, okay, let's do it another way.
No, I mean, personally, we've seen there is some bird loss when you get further to the end of the row at that end.
Yeah. This year.
This year. Last year, not so much?
Some years we don't see any.
Oh.
I mean, if we do, it's like absolutely negligible.
Right on. Okay.
I am a believer in the
fantastic.
efficacy of the squawker. Yeah.
Nice.
Go ahead.
Well, no, I guess, that sacrifice, if we want to look at it that way, seems worth it to me. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. I would rather plant more vines than install nets. Plant more vines and commit to losing more fruit, but hopefully, still getting more fruit just by virtue of having more vines, and just hope that the birds won't take all the new fruit. So that's my thought on it.
Love it. You're making your first wine this year?
In a manner of speaking, yes.
What is it?
Insofar as there's a 3-gallon carboy with a piece of tape and my name on it. And it's...
What's in that carboy?
It's Frontenac Gris.
Oh! Here we are. Speak of the devil.
Whether it will remain 100% Frontenac Gris remains to be seen. But I plan to sparkle it.
Oh, okay. And drink it all yourself, right?
If I get my way. But I'm not used to that. So. Yeah, the trick is positioning yourself so that when you don't get your way, quote unquote, what you get is still excellent.
Yeah. What is your role here, Caleb? I just wanted to say, you may be the dish boy, but you are also the chef of all of our meals.
Yeah.
That were amazing,
of course,
and have been, and
yeah.
continue to be, and do make it this special occasion when you come out to help this whole process happen.
Well, thanks.
Which ties into your role, I think.
It does. It does perfectly, because I do see one of my most important roles is that of providing context of food for the wine, because I really believe that wine, first and foremost, is an expression of food culture, and we are in a unique time and place to help establish a new wine culture in a place with a pre-existing food culture.
Right.
Vermont in particular.
Right.
I think Deirdre's and my approach to wine is exploring how wine is a cultural expression, and how can we support that expression with food. And it's a natural offshoot of my role as the chef in our restaurant to continue in that way in the winery. And I think another important part of our philosophy and our approach to the work is choices about what we want our work life to be like.
Well, that is something I've also noticed as really healthy and sane and beautiful. Not just avoiding the bad, but incorporating, like the way Deirdre runs out and picks flowers for every meal, and when we arrived at the house, she quickly put flowers in my bedroom before I could even get in there.
Yeah.
Like fresh flowers.
Yeah.
And just the little things like that, but every meal looks like a little moment of beauty rather than just something that we did to fuel our work effort.
Right. Yep. Well, you mentioned you mentioned the role of beauty, and Deirdre and I both think that is important to consider. And personally, I feel that the role of beauty in one's daily life is, by and large, across our society, underappreciated, overlooked, and undervalued.
I tend to agree very strongly. I mean, even just in the way that these things are growing up into the canopy, they're flowering plants. They add this beautiful contrast to the grapes and the grape leaves. You have these beautiful spiders. You have these beautiful daisy fleabanes. You have these little purple flowers that pop up, milkweed.
Yeah,
just a whole assortment. The veg, there's a texture and a color and aesthetic element to it that I think is easy to see and hard to overlook, as long as you aren't judgmental about it, like I was saying, like I was, Or I think
Right.
you could be. You could.
Well, that'll be a little bit too late for us.
Yeah.
If you had a
Right,
if you had a
just a little bit
preconceived
more
idea of how it should be,
Yeah.
Right
you
before
might.
die. Right before you die, please give me a chocolate.
And yet, I just see beauty now, which is lovely.
Well, don't get ahead. That's what happens.
Yeah. Well, thanks for covering that topic with me, because I wanted to make sure that your genuine question didn't just get answered with a breezy joke.
Got it. But that's also a good part of your role, the breezy jokes
Yeah.
at times.
Caleb keeps us laughing and well fed and sane.
Well said.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, there's nothing like coming in from a cold night in the winery when you're just like sticky and just like soaked from like cleaning so much, and then there is a warm meal and some nice wine waiting for you.
Oh my god. Yeah. There is nothing better.
Oh yeah, and of course cozy pants.
Oh yeah.
Mandatory
Oh,
mandatory
yeah.
dinner
Caleb,
attire.
One of the biggest supporters of the cozy pants.
Which are they all men's pants?
It's not just a movement; it's a way of life.
Right, like something comfortable.
These are hard pants.
Yeah.
These come off as soon as we are in the house.
Yeah. It's like the equivalent of taking your bra off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And being able to
I get
breathe.
that.
I love that. Yeah. It's like taking off your bra bottoms.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it will.
It's like taking your bra.
Could you say your name?
Hi, I'm Emma.
Could you say your name?
Hi, I'm Louise.
The tireless.
The tireless Louise.
Could you say your name?
Hi, I'm Sadie.
Well, a question for you that I prepped you for 2 days ago. Why do you care about this kind of farming?
That question.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, first I think it comes down to essentially a moral obligation, which we talked about. It's it's the right thing to do,
Right,
and of course the question is like, how do you come up with that's the right thing to do? And I think it's being taught and I think it's kind of both nature and nurture. What we experience, what we observe, what we're taught about the environment that we live in, and seeing, not only the magic and wonder of it all, and being exposed to that, but also seeing the things that are being done to it and the negative things. What big ag is doing to soil. When you can see a burnt field, from glyphosate, not because it's been burned, but because the chemical they've put on the soil and the flora on the soil is burned from that, and you see that next to a green, bright, vibrant green field that hasn't had that, that you begin to draw conclusions.
Yeah,
right?
I do.
Yeah.
Maybe
but
so.
I think it's just like, it's about things that are bigger than us. And it's about being human. It's not just about being a human. I mean, it is about being a human within the natural world, but it's about being human with other humans, and how do we survive together, on this planet, and how do we take care of this planet, not for us so much now, but for the future. So, I mean, those are like things that I think are important.
Yeah.
About why to do it this way, and that's from an environmental ecological perspective. From a creative perspective, I think, farming in this way, the wines are more. The wines tell more. They say more, and that was my experience as a wine buyer. And there was a moment when I realized that the wines on my wine list were 100% biodynamic without me having sought that out.
Without that being a criteria.
Without that being a criteria at the time. And
Wow.
this is before we were really talking about natural wine and biodynamics and organic. And I was like, what's up with this?
Right.
Why am I attracted to all these wines? And, I think Caleb and I both felt that that said something to us. Mm-hmm. And about the way we wanted to work with the land that we had the privilege of being on. But it was also this imperative of like, why would we do it any other way? If we know that, if we have that knowledge now that there's a difference, not only in how it affects the landscape we live in, but the people, and it affects the craft of it, why would we do it any other way? Mm-hmm. It just doesn't make any sense when you get to that place in the thinking.
Yeah.
So I guess that's why. We started farming for the restaurant, vegetables for the restaurant menu, and Caleb's mother is a wonderful master gardener. And, she had a huge influence on us, in terms of education and thought of farming in this way. It was like, again, that's the way you do it, and why would you do it any other way? Why would you use chemicals? Why would you put that in your body? Why would you put that in the soil? Why would you treat the land any differently than you would your body? It's like basic ideas like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here we are immersed literally up to our chins in this, and some of us over our chins in this land. I would hate for it to be any other way, personally.
Me too.
Because I like immersing myself. Anna, what's next in your journey?
Oh, wow, okay. I think I said this to you your first week you were here, maybe?
Uh-huh.
We were picking the Frontenac Noir in West Addison. And I think what's next for me is just still continuing to learn more.
What do you want to learn?
Specifically, something I'm really interested in that I can also apply to what we're doing is more specific biodynamic practices, actually creating the compost for the compost spray and things like that. And just really, but also I'm very curious to start identifying any kind of correlations with planetary transits to what's going on in the vineyard as well as the fermentations. For example, just this morning there is a full moon tomorrow, and we're walking through the rows, and all of these huge orb weavers are all building new webs, but their webs look so pristine in a way that they haven't really the rest of the season, I feel like. And so I'm like, what is going on here? Full moon, and then we're entering the eclipse cycle, and I'm like, what is going on there? But last year the majority of our fermentations took a really, really long time for this sugar to drop, but Mercury and Mars were retrograde for a huge portion of that time. And so it's just understanding correlations like that, and then being able to use that to just better plan and account for things. But it's again just observing natural cycles and correlations, not necessarily causations, but then how do you get that to all work together?
Any astrological projections for this vintage?
Ooh. No, well, Uranus has been in Taurus, and it will continue to be there, I think, until 20. It's got a little bit of ways to go.
Okay.
And Uranus is the planet of kind of disruption, instability and happening in Venusian Earth sign Taurus, which is all about, the natural world, pretty much. It makes sense to me that we have had a lot of tumultuous, destabilizing, sudden weather events that have impacted our very Venusian product that we put out.
Right.
But also, the work that we do on a general basis. Taurus is, it's also, head down, how do we get through this? And
How do we work with disruption? Exactly as Cami said.
So we still have more of that. So it's mostly just, how do you work with disruption?
Cami, the question I have for you is, can you sort of describe this time of day that we're in right now and what it's like being here?
Well, this is, I guess, it's the golden hour.
Feels like it.
Feels like it. So yeah, it's that time of day where we're like, we've been picking all day. Things are starting to slow down a little bit. Crickets.
Yeah, I hear that. Singing.
Yeah.
Mosquitoes.
The mosquitoes have been
ridiculous.
Buck wild all day. And so they're just still hanging around. I don't know. It's like if you're quiet, you can hear the crickets. You can hear some birds. There's a lot of bees buzzing away on the daisy fleabane. And yeah,
there's a little something.
There's a mouse, I think, or a bird. But yeah, it's like we're getting to that the slow down part of the day.
What does this mean to you to be able to do this as your job?
Oh man, I love it. It's challenging in many ways, but I wouldn't want to do anything else. I get to be outside. I get to work with plants. I get to make wine, which helps me tap into my creativity. And I get to be part of a process. I get to see it from beginning to end and then start it over again and take what I learned, apply it. And usually, at this time of the year, it's like I've spent all the growing season, panicking and crying. And then at the end of the season, you're like, oh, yeah, right. Plants are resilient and, it's all going to be all right. And I learned a lot and just have to remember that I just really need to trust in the power of plants and nature and trust that I am a part of that.
Love that. As I re-listen to this, I am overwhelmed with gratitude for my hosts and my colleagues over the past 3 weeks. Caleb and Deirdre, Anna and Cami, thank you so much. And for all of you who made it through this epically long episode, may you have a beautiful harvest and enjoy every minute of it and not take it for granted.